Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Steve Jagger. I graduated from Vancouver College in 1996. I'm the co-president of the Alumni Association along with Mark Reed. The Vancouver College Alumni Association is a member-driven organization aimed at bringing all alumni together. We normally run a bunch of events, including the annual alumni golf tournament, the Christmas lunch, there's a hockey game, fishing derby, basketball, and a lot more. But the COVID-19 situation adjusted or canceled all of our events for 2020. And so we decided to set up a webinar series as a way to bring alumni from around the world together to tell their stories, as well as raise some money for Vancouver College alumni-owned restaurants. So most of you know the ticket price is $10 to show up and hang out with us and ask some questions of our guests. That $10 raised, 100% of those proceeds go to us purchasing, the Alumni Association purchasing a gift certificate from an alumni-owned restaurant. And then we sit on that gift certificate and we'll use it as a prize or whatever next year at the Alumni Golf Tournament. But the idea is to put cash in the hands of the alumni restaurant today, and then we can use it as a prize later. A couple housekeeping items and one actual special announcement. I got a call today from Pat Mahoney. Patty's team at Uno Gelato has decided that for the month of August, they are going to donate $1 from every pint of gelato that they sell through their online website to this Vancouver College alumni cause going to the restaurant. So over August, every pint sold online, they'll put $1 towards this. So it's a great a generous donation from the Mahoney family and the Uno Gelato team. And then finally, last week's episode, I mentioned the Alumni Quarter that is being completed at the school. The school is selling bricks that are going to go on the floor with alumni's name and grad year on them. They cost $2,500. You get a 100% tax receipt. The school needs to sell or wants to sell 400 of them. A few of you messaged me last week asking if other people from your year had participated. So the school has that on the website. If you go to vcalumni.com and look up the Alumni Quarter class participation project, you can see it broken down by grad year. So check that out. And then finally, before I introduce our guest, you can all ask questions in the chat or on Facebook in the comments, and I can get them answered for you in the last little bit here. So with all that said, let's introduce Kevin Falcon. So Kevin graduated from Vancouver College in 1981. He's the executive vice president of Anthem Capital. Prior to that, he was the Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier of BC. During his 12 years in government, Kevin held numerous senior ministerial portfolios, including transportation, infrastructure, and health. So Kevin, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. I'm looking forward to it. Good for you to, I don't know, somehow manage to drag at least a few people out of a beautiful evening and listen to me for some reason.
No, it's great. I appreciate you doing it. So maybe we'll jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about your time at VC. Obviously, we'll have to talk about some politics. It's a big chunk of your world, and get to where you're at with Anthem. But maybe we start back at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about your time at Vancouver College? I actually don't know when you arrived at VC, what grade you came in, and sort of how you ended up going to Vancouver College.
Sure. Well, I was part of the North Shore crew. There was a group of people out of North and West Vancouver that used to have to make the long trek to Vancouver College. I went to St. Anthony's Elementary School in West Vancouver. And so, my parents, my elder brothers had all gone to Vancouver College, some just for the last few years, some for their entire high school period. And there were 6 boys in our family, so we were all going to eventually end up there. And it was a bit of a journey to get out there, frankly. It was like, I think, 3 buses. And, that wasn't that much fun, candidly. But, it was great because there was other people from the North Shore that used to go over there with us. So that made it a bit easier. And I started in grade 8 and went right through to grade 12. So I spent 5 years at Vancouver College, 5 really great years, frankly. Made some, fantastic friends and had a good time while I was there, like I'm sure most of us did.
Yeah, definitely. Did you play sports or anything at VC, or what extracurricular activities were you involved in?
Well, interestingly, I was senior athlete of the year in grade 7 at St. Anthony's. And so as soon as I got to Vancouver College, they were really on me to, the be in football and track and field and basketball, et cetera. But it was, and I played football initially in grade 8, but it was really hard for me because, again, the distance from home. So after a practice and everything else, trying to get the buses to get back home by the time I got home was really, really late. And it just really wasn't working. And my parents really weren't in a position to be driving me back and forth during those off hours because they had, everyone else to look after. So, I really ended up not doing sports in high school after grade 8, which was unfortunate because I love sports and I was pretty good, but it was just too difficult.
Yeah, fair enough. I did the same thing, grade 8 football, and that was it for me for football.
Although I do have to say, I was crazy enough one year to be dragged into an alumni football match. And that was one of the most harrowing experiences of my life, because I think that must have been in the 90s at some point when I was well past my prime. And so anyhow, I was out there literally just to attend May Day. And they're like, oh, yeah, are you playing the alumni football game? And I'm like, no, I'm just kind of here just to, be support. No, you got to play. Come on. They drag me in. Next thing you know, I'm all kitted out in the gear. Next thing you know, we're running out onto the field and the grade 12s are there. They're way bigger than I remember grade 12s being. And it was quite, I had a lot of fun actually, but I was sore for about a week afterwards.
Yeah, I played in a couple of those alumni football games, and I remember I got run over one time by Bart Hall. And the school definitely doesn't, the alumni doesn't do full pads, full tackle alumni football anymore. I don't know when that stopped, but it was probably a good decision. Because guys would be, hurt for a week or so after trying to sort it out.
Ours was full contact, full equipment. It was, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like we still do the alumni game, but it's definitely not full contact. It's flag football.
Oh, good.
So what happened after Vancouver College? Grade 12, you finish up, you take off to university, right?
Yeah, I went to Simon Fraser University and graduated from SFU. That's where I met another, a real good network of friends that were also, really into politics. People like Ryan Beatty, Steve Cass, and John Vickerstaff. Christy Clark, ironically, was there while I was there. A whole bunch of people, actually. There was quite a milieu of students at that time that were part of SFU. And SFU, everyone knows it's a pretty well-known left-wing university. So it was quite ironic that at this quite well-known left-wing university, where many of the profs were, had fled, the U.S. they were draft dodgers, frankly, came up to SFU. And so for a bunch of us, we were involved in the conservative clubs at that time, the Federal Conservative Club and the Social Credit Club, which was the precursor to the provincial BC Liberals. And that's where we, sort of got a lot of experience in politics, and I really enjoyed it. I love the whole, intellectual stimulus of debating and arguing and, trying to make a case and most importantly, not being afraid to have an unpopular opinion in a milieu where nobody shared that opinion, it seemed like, except for, the people that happened to be part of our clubs. I mean, it was very, very, hostile to any kind of contrarian thought. So it was great. It really molded me, frankly, for, what came next.
Nice. And so can I back up for two? I got two questions from that. One, was SFU your only choice? That's where you wanted to go? Or did you look into a bunch of different schools and chose SFU? How'd that process go?
Yeah, it was probably the school that I could get accepted to. That
That's
time
fair.
they had a real low GPA threshold, as I recall. And for me, it was really more what was going to be the most convenient. I probably, if I was doing it all over again, I definitely would have looked farther. Maybe McGill, maybe back east, just as a life experience. But really, at that point, it was more about what could I afford and what was going to be most convenient. So SFU kind of ticked the boxes. A couple of my friends were going there too, so we thought, let's all go together. And that's how I ended up. It wasn't a really highly sophisticated choice, I have to be honest.
Did you live on campus when you were there, or do you commute again?
No, I commuted. Yeah, we commuted back and forth. We usually, shared cars, similar to what we did when we eventually got to driving age at VC. A bunch of us used to carpool back and forth all the time when we could finally avoid the buses. Nice. And same thing at SFU.
And you mentioned when you got there, you basically dived into the political clubs. Were you always interested in that kind of stuff, or did that happen at SFU, or did you arrive already interested in the political world?
I arrived already interested, and
why or how?
well, yeah, no, it's a really great question, because I really didn't get it. It didn't come from my family. My parents were really quite apolitical, to be honest with you. Um, and so my interest in politics really came about because one of my friends at the time, John Vickerstaff, his father, said to me and him, "Hey, boys, I'm going to be putting up signs for a guy named Ron Huntington, who was the member of parliament for, I can't remember what the riding was called, one of the North Shore ridings," and asked if we would come help. And so we said, sure, because we're like 14 and 15, and what do we care? So we went out there all full of enthusiasm, put up a bunch of signs. It was really nice. I remember how friendly everyone was at the political office, because they saw these two young guys that were there helping out, and everyone was super nice to us. And so I took some of the brochures home, and I was reading them. I thought, oh, that's interesting. It just kind of twigged my interest, and from there I started paying a lot more attention to what was happening in the news and what was happening around the world, and so the influences started to form, and I really started to recognize leadership. I started to really take an interest in leaders and people that were making decisions that maybe seemed unpopular, but to me seemed like the right decision. So I started to develop an admiration for certain political leaders, Margaret Thatcher and later Ronald Reagan, and even parts of what Brian Mulroney was doing at the time. Really kind of attracted me more and more into being involved. So that was the process.
Sorry, you end up at SFU and you're interested in these clubs. What was the first club that you got involved in?
I think it was the BC Young Socreds. At that time, the Social Credit Party was, still a pretty big deal. And it was Bill Bennett, I think, was still the premier of the province at the time. One of our great premiers, by the way. And I've got a great story I can tell you about him later on with the William Bennett Bridge, if you don't let me forget. Got lots of great stories in my life in politics. But he was the premier at the time, and we were going through some challenging economic circumstances, in the sort of the mid '80s there, and but he was making what I thought were the right decisions. They were not popular, but they were the right decisions for the long-term, benefit of the province, and so we had the BC Young Socred chapter was the largest club on campus. Ironically, given that it was kind of a famous left-wing campus, the largest club on campus happened to be a bunch of, sort of right-wing conservative guys, myself, Ryan Beatty, and a whole bunch of others that were involved. And we're all still friends to this day. But I think we really, at that time, like I say, you had to have pretty tough skin to stand up for the government of the day at the time, when the common perception out of the universities was how terrible they were as a government. But we saw beyond, some of that simplistic thinking, and really recognized that the decisions they were making were for the long-term benefit of the province, which meant the long-term benefit of us as young people. And, so that's how I got involved. And then I was sort of less involved with the Conservative Club, the Federal Conservative Club, but there was a lot of crossover. Like a lot of the members that were involved in the BCYS were involved in the Conservative Club too. So I kind of got involved in some of their stuff, but not really as actively involved in the federal side of things. Way more active in the provincial side.
Interesting. And you did that for like your whole 4 years? I'm assuming 4 years at SFU?
Oh, totally. Yeah, we got involved in all kinds of things. We didn't like the Peak newspaper out there, and so we wanted to go start our own newspaper that sort of had some alternative thought. This is not uncommon in universities, by the way. Even to this day, it's really sad, because universities, to me, ought to be a place where there is a clash of ideas, and that's exactly the area and the location that you should be encouraging debate. And instead, what we have taken place, in my view, on a lot of the campuses is really this dumbing down of a clash of ideas, and that's not a good thing. And so we couldn't stand it at the time, because the Peak newspaper was extreme left wing. It was supporting like Sandinista guerrillas and El Salvador, and pretty much every left wing cause that was out there, they would be behind and promoting. And we were like, well, this doesn't represent us. So we started our own newspaper. We got some funding from. We go knock on the door of business people that barely knew us, and remember, I think Murray Pesm was one of them, that we just cold called Peter Brown, some other people like that, saying, look, we're students at this university. Here's the kind of newspapers that, they're printing out there, and, help us out. And so we started a newspaper called Liberté, and it started writing alternative pieces that, gave it an alternative point of view. And God, it was awesome, because it just ignited a firestorm out at SFU with, all kinds of people all upset that there was this group of students that dared to believe in free expression, and were challenging the the orthodoxy and the lock that the existing paper had on the campus. So it was a lot of fun, and those kind of fights, they as I look back, they're very defining as character, because what you realize is that nothing important ever comes easy, and you're never going to get consensus on on a lot of things. But it's really important to not be afraid to step into that battle. And there are times, and I would argue that right now in our country, there are times when we are really starved of political leadership, and we have to support good people that are prepared to step into that vortex and fight the good fight. And so I think that was a real defining period of time for me in university, to be honest with you.
That's great. And so does that paper still exist at SFU, or what happened to it?
No, it doesn't exist. It ran for a number of years. In fact, we, a bunch of us started a foundation, post university, called the Liberté Foundation, which exists today. I think there's copies of the newspaper on the Liberté Foundation. And, we provide scholarships to, by the way, so if any of you have kids that are thinking of going to university, any of our universities, and they believe or are willing to espouse, free market, free enterprise type ideals, they should apply to Liberté, because we provide grants and support to students that are helping carry forward that cause. Liberté Foundation. There you go.
Great.
So it lives on in spirit, but the paper itself is long gone.
Nice. That's good. So when you finished up at SFU, what was next for you?
Well, I wanted to learn about the development business, and I went to work in the real estate development business with an entrepreneur named Dan Fritz, who's still around. And Dan was a really smart guy. He built the hotel downtown, which at the time was flagged as the first, I forget the name of the hotel group. It was an Asian group, I think out of Japan, that it was initially flagged with. And he built the hotel, which today is the Metropolitan Hotel, but he built it in 1982. This was before I joined him, but imagine building a hotel in 1982 when interest rates went to 22%. I think he lost almost everything, but his legacy was he left a beautiful hotel, which still exists in the downtown. I still go to meetings there every once in a while, and I always think about him. But I went to work with him and started learning about the real estate investment business, and we together set up a joint venture and started acquiring apartment buildings in Calgary and Edmonton, and renovating them, fixing them up, and then selling them off. And at that time, this was in the sort of the early to mid 1990s, and Ralph Klein had just gotten into government in Alberta. The real estate market was very distressed. There was a lot of, you could buy real estate there at very attractive cap rates. Like I'm talking in, the 14-15% cap rates on apartment buildings. And so we went in there and we acquired some cool buildings and did some renovations. I still own some of my inventory from way back when, if you can believe it. And it's performed very well over the years. Refinance it all the time. Tony would know how this story works, but it's just been great. And that was, I think, another example to me. I looked at Alberta at the time, and Ralph Klein was very unpopular when he first got elected. A lot of people forget this because he was making a lot of cuts across the board. He was really right-sizing the government to say, you know what, we have to live within our means. It's going to be tough, but we all got to do our bit. And he did. And I looked at that and said, that is awesome, because what that's going to do is attract capital, investment, build confidence. I want to be there. And so I was in there, looking at and acquiring apartment buildings at a time when, I felt things were going to really improve. And sure enough, they really did. You saw vacancy rates started to drop dramatically in the multifamily sector. Money started coming back in. It helped that the oil prices went from 13, back up to $40, $50. And, people started, they sort of got their vibe back again. But, I think leadership mattered in that case.
Nice. And so when you were doing that, were you living in Vancouver at the time
Yes,
and flying in and out to Calgary to pick your buildings and deal with it?
that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah.
Never moved there.
Yeah, so in that days, I think we were faxing back, and forth with brokers. They'd fax us deals or buildings. You'd look at them, ask some questions, do a little bit of due diligence. If it survived the due diligence, we typically try and tie it up. In those days, you could get phenomenal terms. So you could get a good, due diligence period. You had lots of time to fly over there, take a look, kick the tires, hire some consultants, take a look at the building, see what the issues were. And you could arrange long closings. It was fantastic. Those days may be reappearing there now. I'm not sure, but it was great at the time.
Right. And you still own a few of them, you said.
Yes. Yeah. Still have some
Awesome.
of the condos there.
That's great. Good for
Yeah.
you. And so how long did you do that?
I did that until sort of the late 90s. And it's interesting because I was spending all this time going back and forth to Alberta, and, I was seeing what was happening there and how great it was. And meanwhile, back in BC, we had an NDP government during the entire decade of the 90s, and they were just destroying the economy of the province. Not to, be too understated about it, but we had the highest marginal income tax rate in North America. Our debt had been downgraded multiple times, 7 different times. There was red tape and regulation all over the place. And I was thinking, this is just brutal. And so that's when, I got really frustrated one day, and with a group of other people, we started what we called a "Have You Had Enough Yet" rally. And we organized a bunch of people that felt, the same as we did. And this was pre-internet, by the way. So a lot harder to reach out to people. It was more like phone calls and faxing people and all this kind of stuff. But we eventually had a huge "Have You Had Enough Yet" rally in Cloverdale and Surrey, British Columbia. We had over 5,000 people attend, and it was a big deal. It got a lot of press coverage because it demonstrated that clearly, if 5,000 people are willing to get together on a weeknight to express how frustrated and angry they are with government, there must be a excuse me, there must be a problem. And so that kind of, I guess, gave me a public profile. And after that, I started, getting lots of people wanting me to, get involved more and all the rest of it. So it kind of happened inadvertently, but it was more born out of my really strong frustration that the economy and the province was going absolutely in the wrong direction, when you could see other provinces doing the right things and moving in the right direction.
And was that was your the total recall effort? Is that what it was called? Was that the beginning of this?
Total Recall flowed out of that. And
Yeah.
what Total Recall was we, as a result of that rally, there was a lot of sort of, what do we do next?
Now what? Yeah.
Yeah, now what? And a lot of people were really pushing hard to say, well, let's recall, there is legislation that was put in place that allowed you to recall, members of the legislature if you're unhappy with the job they were doing, or that they were, acting really poorly. And I was always very, very cautious about this Total Recall. So what I said was, we will look at it and see whether it is in fact feasible, whether the public would be supportive of us doing that prior to actually doing it. Because I didn't want to just, lead some crazy crusade that was going to waste a lot of time, effort, and money and achieve, negative results. And so we did a lot of investigation. We did polling. We did a bunch of things to look to see whether this was an option. And really, at the end of the day, it came back and it was clear to us that it wasn't an option. It wasn't a feasible option, and I wasn't prepared to go down that path. And so we ultimately said we wouldn't do that. We disappointed some of our supporters, I'm sure, but I wasn't prepared to just do it for the sake of doing it. It had to be something that, we would win. And while there was support for doing it, I felt that we had to have at least 60% support within any, we picked sort of particular ridings where the NDP we thought were vulnerable. And we said, if we can hit that 60% threshold where 60% of the people are prepared to say, yes, we will sign a piece of paper saying we want to get rid of our MLA, then we would consider it. But we got up to sort of 55, I think was the highest in one of the ridings. And it wasn't sufficient. We had to make sure that we had metrics that made sense. So we decided not to do it. But again, I was in the news all the time because of that, and I was doing that off the corner of my desk, by the way, while I'm trying to run a business. But it was still worthwhile, I think. And it probably not probably, it almost certainly led to the ultimate, downfall of the NDP government and the election of the BC Liberals in 2001.
Right, and so that's a good tie-in to kind of where we're going into your sort of your political experience. And for anybody that's in the Zoom or the Facebook world, if you guys have questions anytime, just throw them into the chat. But so you did that was 1999. You got elected to the BC Liberals for Surrey Cloverdale in 2001, right?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
And so how did that go? Like this is, I guess it's kind of a big jump from being in clubs and kind of dealing with some of these rallies to sort of taking the step of like, yeah, I'm going to jump into public life.
Yeah. Well, what happened, it was very inadvertent, to be honest with you. The BC Liberals were in opposition at that time, and Gordon Campbell became their leader, I think in 1994, maybe 93. But I didn't know him at all. And as they were in opposition, the MLA for Surrey Cloverdale was actually a BC Liberal. Her name was Bonnie McKinnon, and she I forget which year she was elected, but she'd been there for at least 5 years. And she announced publicly that she wasn't going to be running again. And this would have been in probably 1999, I think, somewhere 2000 maybe, probably 2000. And so right away, I got all this pressure from all the people that knew me out there saying, we want you to run. And I was like, no. Because in those days, an MLA in Victoria made $68,000 a year. There was, and it was, I think a cabinet minister made about $110,000 a year. And not that that's like, money to sneeze at, but I just thought to myself, like, there's just no way I want to go do that. But what I said is that I would help them find a good candidate. So I talked to a bunch of the councillors that I knew in Surrey, many of whom I'd helped elect. That's another story, but I used to get involved in their municipal campaigns, helping them run for office. And, I asked Diane Watts, for example, and she couldn't run because her kids were really young, and Marvin Hunt at the time, and he said, no, he didn't really want to, even though he's an MLA now, ironically enough, and others. And so for a number of reasons that, a lot of them couldn't. So then Gordon Campbell reached out to me. I got to know him by this point. I'm giving you the Coles Notes version of the whole thing because we're covering a couple of years here, but I got to know him a little bit, and he called me and asked me if I would run. And I candidly, I told him, no, I wasn't interested, but I was trying hard to find good candidates. And then he, called me back for another meeting and said, look, Kevin, I get why you don't want to run. I totally understand. I've been in the private sector too. And believe me, it's been a huge sacrifice to spend 5 years of my life as the leader of the opposition. And I'm telling you, I didn't do this to be leader of the opposition. I did this because I want to become premier, and I want to make sure that we can, bring about the kind of changes we're going to need to get the economy turned around. And if I don't have good people running with me, I'm not going to be able to get the job done. So I get there's a bunch of good reasons why you shouldn't do it, but it's not good enough. You need to make a commitment to help, get this province turned around. And I'm asking you to do that as a British Columbian. I'm asking you to make that commitment and join with me and get it done. And wow, I walked away from that meeting. I said I needed time to think about it. And I walked away from that and thought to myself, he's right. I can't just sit on the sidelines and organize rallies and say what a terrible government the NDP is and all the rest of it. And then when it comes time for, to step forward and maybe do something about it, then you kind of say, oh no, not me. Someone else can do this. So I thought, okay, I went back and had a meeting with him. And I said, I'll tell you what, I've really thought this over, Gordon Campbell. And I said, and I'm willing to do it, but under one condition, actually a number of conditions. And I had a list. And I said, my biggest fear is I don't want to get elected and go through all this effort and go to Victoria, hopefully, and I'm confident we'll form government, but I don't want to get elected and find out that we're going to suddenly wimp out when it comes time to make the hard decisions. Because I knew if we were going to try and get the economy turned around and the government moving in a new direction, we were going to have to make hard decisions, right? We're going to have to do tax cuts. We're going to have to cut regulation. We're going to have to lay off civil servants. We're going to have to do a lot of stuff that's going to be unpopular. And I've seen it happen before, and governments get weak-kneed when they get a lot of opposition, and they often fold. So it was really important to me that he looked me in the eye one-on-one and tell me that he was prepared to do all the things that I had on my list. So he looked at the list. I'll never forget this. He was very quiet. He went through the list with his pen. He's ticking off the boxes of all the different things I had. I had labor code changes. I wanted tax cuts. I wanted to see, red tape reduction was really important, but measurable, not just, talking about it, but actually doing it in a way that you could, quantifiably measure the results, et cetera. I had this long list. He looked at the list and he said, Kevin, I'll give you my word that not only are we going to do all the stuff you have on your list, we're going to do a lot more. And he said, I didn't spend, like I told you before, 5 years of my life in opposition to get elected and do nothing. So you got my word. And we shook on it, and I believed him. And I walked away and I said, well, I guess I'm running for office.
Yes, I'm in.
Yeah, I better go back and get to work. And so I did. And he kept his word. We did everything that was on my list and more. And I'm very proud of that.
That's awesome. And so this is your first term in politics. What were the big things that you achieved, and what were the things that, I'm sure there's things that just you didn't get done that you wanted to get done in that first term?
Well, I'll tell you something. The reason why I'm so proud is that we won a historic mandate in 2001. So a lot of people might not remember, and it's before your time. For you, Stephen, for sure, but we won 77 of 79 seats in that 2001 election, and that was a massive mandate to get things done. And we went in with a very clear plan, and I think this is what gets governments in trouble so often, that they get elected but they really don't have they actually either don't have a plan, or they had a plan but they're not following it because they're distracted by all the usual things that happen when you're in government, and there are lots of distractions. Focus is so important. And we had 212 specific commitments that we said we were going to accomplish when we got elected. And we had them blown up into a huge board that was in our caucus meeting room. So every day when we went into caucus, there it was staring at us. And we would tick off each of those commitments as we undertook them. So, for example, in our first 3 years, we said we would balance the budget by our third year in power. We said that we would have a large personal income tax cut. We didn't say what the amount was. We just said it was going to be a large personal income tax cut. And we said we were going to reduce unnecessary regulatory burden and red tape by 1/3 within that first 3 years. So those are kind of the big ones that bookended our first term. And there was, like I say, another, 100 or 208 that we still had to undertake. And what I'm enormously proud of is that we achieved all that. And this is important because I was having breakfast with Steve Forbes from Forbes magazine in Montreal last year. And this is when it really struck home to me. And I was telling him the story because he was interested in the fact that I was a former finance minister. And so he asked me, tell me about it and what was it like? And so I was explaining exactly what I'm telling you guys. And that is that, we had these commitments. We went in, and on our first day in office, first day in the legislature, we passed a 25% personal income tax cut across the board. And by our third year in office, we balanced the budget exactly like we said we were going to do. We balanced it in accordance with GAAP principles, which was important because we were the first government in Canada to say that we were going to force government to keep their books the same way government forces you to keep yours, generally accepted accounting principles. Not only did we balance the budget and do the big 25% personal income tax cut, but we also met our target of reducing red tape by over 1/3 in our first 3 years. In fact, it was 42%. And that, I remember the reaction Steve Forbes had when I explained this to him. And he was just staggered. He said, that is an unbelievable record. You need to write a book about this, because he said, I have, been watching governments, my entire life, and I've never heard this story. But to hear a government that actually went forward with those kind of changes and followed through on them and completed them and was task oriented like that is unbelievable. So I thought, wow, that's quite a compliment by the publisher of Forbes magazine, and I do think it's an important story.
Totally. Yeah. And so, like, you guys had success. You had this massive mandate. You won, in 2001, obviously, you were reelected in 2005 and then again in 2009.
Yes.
So I've got a lot of questions around that, but just was there a point where you're like, okay, this is ridiculous, I'm done? Like, how did you decide to do 3 terms?
It's a great question. It's a great question because, for me, every day I was in government felt like an opportunity cost. And it's not that I loved it. And there's really great people. I loved working with the civil servants I worked with. They, by and large, are really professional, hardworking, good people in the civil service. I loved working with my colleagues and my political staff. They were great people. And I had always imagined that I just couldn't have imagined myself when I started out doing more than 2 terms, because I really felt like financially that would be enough of a hit, for me to take. And I want to get back into the private sector while I was still young enough to, hopefully, make some money and you don't go into government to make money. I can assure you that. So, but really what kept me going, and the reason why I ran for, the in 2005 and then again in 2009, was because we were still doing big things, big important things. And, I was Minister of Transportation. I oversaw the largest capital infrastructure program in the history of the province of British Columbia. We built, we built the Canada Line. We got the Evergreen Line underway. We built the Port Mann Bridge, the Pitt River Bridge, the William Bennett Bridge, the Sea to Sky Highway. I could go on and on and on, but we're talking tens of billions of dollars of projects, that I could really see happening, and I could see the progress, and I could see the confidence returning to the province. I could see, how much money was flowing back into the province, and investors and investment, and people were doing well, and unemployment was dropping. And so when you see those results and you're still doing big things, you want to keep running. So in 2009, for example, when in 2008, we announced that we were bringing in a revenue neutral carbon tax. And, again, this was big, bold thinking. And it wasn't, there had been no other jurisdiction in North America that had done that. And BC was the first. And, we had lots of opposition. The NDP opposed us. They campaigned against it, which split a lot of their supporters, because a lot of the, green-minded voters were saying, yeah, this is great. This is leadership. This is what we want. And I was very proud of that, because we were constantly, pushing the envelope and trying to continue to do big things. And I give a lot of credit to Gordon Campbell for that. He was a leader that was not afraid of being bold and making big decisions, and just being prepared to walk through fire to try and do the right thing. And so that's what kept me going. Now, my personal life started to change. I got married in the late 2000s. I had my first child in 2010. So I was kind of late to the marriage party. So by the time, 2012 rolled around, I'm deputy premier, I'm minister of finance. And then I find out my wife's pregnant with our second child. And, that was really a moment of truth for me, because I realized that, now I'm going to have a second child. In fact, when I sort of did the calculation, I realized, oh my goodness, like, she's technically supposed to give birth on the day that I rise in the house to read my budget speech. And I thought that would not be good, because it's not something you can say, oh, by the way, I can't do it today because my wife's having a baby. And then you can imagine telling your wife, oh, sorry, dear, I can't come by. I'm going to be giving a speech. So that wasn't the only reason, trust me. But it was like, I started thinking, wow, I've now got 2 young girls that I didn't know she was going to be a girl at the time, but my wife was pregnant, so I'm going to have 2 kids, and I'm working a job that it requires me to travel not only around the province, around the country. As a finance minister, I got to go to all the world financial markets. So whether it's in Switzerland or France or London or Singapore, all through Asia, after every budget, et cetera. So there's a lot of travel involved, and I thought, I just don't think I want to keep doing this. And I'm still young enough that I can hang up the skates. I can feel proud of my record in government, because I really can point to some things that I accomplished. There was a new premier at the time, so Christie was now the premier, and I felt, turnover is a good thing anyhow. I didn't want to be I don't want to be a professional politician and spend my entire life in politics. So I just felt like that was a good time to go, and I was torn, because I knew that me leaving was going to be, like, people were going to say, oh, he's leaving because he doesn't support the party anymore because Christie's the premier and she's haven't, had a few stumbles, etc. And it just simply wasn't the case. I just, made a very, very clinical decision that now was the time for me to go back into the private sector while I was still young enough and hopefully earn a bit of money and look after my kids, who I have to make sure, are going to be looked after for college and all the rest. So that's how I made the decision. So it was, it was 12. I mean, I did my time. I did, almost 13 years.
You put in a shift.
Yeah, I put in a pretty good shift. So I felt like I did my bit.
Yeah, no question at all. So I feel like when I talk to people about politics or getting into politics, like so many people that would be great, but they say like, oh my God, no, like you get attacked personally, people protest on your front lawn. Like there's just so much that comes at politicians, even if you totally agree, like that whatever they're doing is not good, but sometimes the public can go a little overboard. Like I'm sure it's happened to you. How do you deal with that? And how do you just sort of keep moving forward of like going back to work, where a lot of people will be like, this is not worth it. There's too much personal going on here.
Yeah. Well, I got to stop saying that's an excellent question, but it really is another excellent question because it does worry me a little bit. I think that, things have changed. When, for many of the years when I was in power, it was really the birth of social media was sort of coming in the latter part of my time in public life. And social media, I think, has really been a mixed blessing for people that are in public life. On the one hand, of course, it gives you that ability to reach out and connect with a lot more people. But if you're not, I think it's also, if you pay too much attention to it, I think it'll make you a worse politician. And by that, I mean, one thing I did in public life that I think served me really well, and this is really the honest to God's truth, I actually really didn't care what they were saying about me. To me, I always operated on a couple of principles. One, I'm not ever going to lie, because I don't want to leave my time in public life with people saying, what a sleazeball he was, or, whatever. I have no problem with people saying, you know what, I can't stand that jerk because, he made a lot of decisions I disagree with. I'm really okay with that. I don't expect people to agree with my decisions. In fact, unanimity is not something you should ever look for if you want to go into public life. I think you have to have a set of values and principles, and then you got to get elected, and then you got to carry them through, and you got to be willing to take all the crap that's going to go with it. And there's a lot of it, but there's not as much as you think either, to be honest with you. At the time, all the time I was in government, I represented Surrey Cloverdale, and it was great riding because it was a very mix. You had sort of a blue collar element in the northern and mid part of my riding. Then you had a farming area sort of towards the southern end of it, and then the really further south and the east, you sort of had a middle class. So I had a really good mixture of British Columbians, if you will. And so I always felt very, very grounded while I was in government. People had no problem. They recognized me everywhere I went. So they had no problem coming up and talking to me about stuff. But people, British Columbians and Canadians are actually really quite good. They're generally not rude. They're actually really nice. And people, if they disagree with you, they're probably too polite to say it. Or sometimes they will say it, and that's okay with me because I didn't mind, having a discussion with people, sometimes an argument. But oftentimes I found that after I spoke to people for a while, they're like, oh, I didn't really realize that. They're just, you can't really expect the public to have all the facts. That's why you get elected. You're supposed to be doing that homework, and you're supposed to know your stuff, and you're supposed to try and make the best decision you think you can make for the benefit of most people. And you have to understand that, not everyone's going to love it, but that's okay. But don't get into politics if you're trying to, if you're in love with yourself and you just like to see your name in the paper or on the news or on news feeds or through social media or what have you, you're not going to do well. But if you do want to get in for the right reasons, because you do care about your community and you care about the province and the country, and you're prepared to be, ethical and do it with integrity and speak truth, then I think that it's a great experience. I met queens, I met business leaders, community leaders, world leaders. It was fantastic. I met average British Columbians from every part of the province. I discovered more about our province than most people will ever know. I realized how large we are, and the diverse range of people and the communities from every part of our province, from the Northeast and the Peace Country to the Northwest to, the Okanagan, the island, the Lower Mainland. Like, it's a huge province, and there's great people in the province. And so to me, it was awesome. I got so much out of public life. And so I would highly recommend it. Don't be jaded because of, because you get frustrated with a lot of the politicians you see out there. I look at what's happening right now, and I can't even believe it. I'm just talking about what's in the news today. Like, it's kind of shocking, when I see what's happening with this We Charity scandal and some of the stuff. I mean, it's remarkable to me because, it's really obvious in politics. Like, some things are super, super easy to understand. And one of them is conflict of interest. And conflict of interest is really easy to understand. If you are doing something and you have any kind of a conflict, your family's involved, or they've paid you money in the past, or you've taken a free trip with them or something, you have to declare it and recuse yourself from voting if there's a discussion in cabinet on it. You have to recuse yourself from the discussion. That's really obvious stuff. And when I see things like that happening today, I just find it really disappointing, because to me, that is like really basic stuff.
Yeah, and you're leading well into my next question. So if we're sort of switching gears, not totally out of politics, but to today's politics, so you're sitting on the sidelines of this, the political world. We're living in this COVID situation. How do you think, from sort of three levels of government, how do you think the federal Liberals are generally handling? Forget, I guess the we thing is a bit of a problem, but federal Liberals on COVID, the BC NDP on COVID, and the Vancouver mayor. Like, how do you feel that each one are handling it?
I think for the most part, well. So I wrote an op-ed piece recently that ran in the Sun in the province, and got it. I think it was went viral a little bit, but basically what I said was, look, I think from a public health point of view, I think all levels of government have actually reacted quite well. And by the way, it doesn't totally surprise me. I was a former health minister. I know that the BC Centre for Disease Control and our public health folks in British Columbia are top rate. And I said at the time, with our senior team at Anthem, when the whole COVID thing first started, and there was a lot of like, how long is this going to last, et cetera, I made one promise to all of them. I said, I promise you this, BC will do very well. We've had experience before with SARS and with H1N1. We've got a very good public health unit. We're going to do very well. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And so I think provincially we did very well. I think the NDP government, I give them credit on this. I think they did the right thing by allowing the professionals to step forward, Dr. Bonnie Henry in particular, and let the professionals and the people that know what they're doing do what they know best. And fortunately, Canadians, unlike many Americans, tend to still have a good level of trust in scientists and doctors and professionals. So they listen, and people did the right thing, and they distanced, they washed hands, they did all the rest of it. And so I'm not at all surprised how well we've done in BC, and a little more unevenly across Canada, but still we've done a fairly good job. I think the federal government has, for the most part, it's been a bit uneven, but I think for the most part they've handled it well too. They've pushed a lot of money out to support people, across the country, to support businesses, and I think that's all good too. So the issue that I have, though, is what's next. And what I don't see is really some big ideas or bold ideas about how we go forward over the next phase. How do we come out of this and give the business community and investors and the investment community the confidence to re-engage and invest and spend money and hire people again? That's what's missing. And in fact, you've got something worse. You've got people now looking and saying, wow, with a $350 billion, a deficit, huge deficits. You've got a $12 billion deficit in BC, and the debt's gone way up. Like, what's that going to mean in terms of future taxation? Like, does that mean they're going to, start going after the equity in our homes now? And so you actually have a reverse effect where people start to worry. And one of the points I tried to make in my op-ed piece was, do all the governments follow the, a variation of the Hippocratic Oath? First, do no further harm. Like, stop with any new taxes, stop with any new regulation or red tape, and don't do anything that's gonna cause a confidence problem. And unfortunately, provincially in the NDP, you see they're bringing forward a bunch of changes to WorkSafe that we got rid of in the early 2000s because it was creating a huge unfunded liability for WorkSafe BC, causing rates to go way up for employers and employees. We got that all under control. It's been operating beautifully for the last 15 years. You're bringing in changes that are going to result in, without any doubt, much higher costs for employers. Maybe not immediately, but certainly down the road, because they're opening the floodgates again to expansion of claims and all the rest of it. That's the last thing they need to be doing. They ought to be doing, and they ought to be thinking about how they're going to create incentives, tax incentives, I would argue, to, yes, it'll cost you money in the short term as a government, but you want to induce the right kind of behavior, and you can actually do it if you're smart to help achieve public policy objectives, like getting more rental buildings built, get more affordable rentals built, etc. So I see a complete lack of planning federally, provincially, and at the local level to make that happen, and that worries me.
So I wish we had more time. We're definitely pushing through. I've got lots more questions, and there's questions coming in on both sides here. So I'm going to hit you with a couple questions that are not totally connected to the one prior. So Tony actually is asking, where do you go for unbiased news, and does that even exist in today's world?
Yeah, I think it does. But what I try to do is, like, I try to screw with the algorithms within social media and stuff. So I purposefully read New York Times, Washington Post. I'll watch MSNBC, CNN. Very, not that much Fox, to be honest with you. But I really try to canvas. I read The Economist. I try very hard to broaden my information portals, if you will, so that I can, sort of sift through all of it and get a sense as to, where is truth. I think the most dangerous thing about Donald Trump as president, having been in public life, is his undermining of trust in government and media. I can tell you, in all my time in government, you can search the record, I've never criticized media. I think they have a really important role to play. They do a really, really important job. And for the most part, I found media to be fair. I mean, it didn't feel good sometimes when they're criticizing us as a government, but often there's either a lot of truth to it or a semblance of truth. So you just have to, be honest with the public and say, look, just because we got elected and formed government doesn't mean we're perfect. We will make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, acknowledge them, talk about how you're going to fix them, and move on. The public doesn't expect us to be perfect, but they do expect integrity. They do expect honesty, and they should expect and demand transparency. And I think if you can get that part right, the rest will work.
So you mentioned Trump. Does he make it in November, or is he out?
No, I've been saying for 3 years, even though I there are people within my network that think he's great, which baffles me. But I've been saying for years now, no, I don't think he'll win re-election. That's become a little more of a popular note now, but I really have been very consistent about that. And it's primarily because I have fundamental trust in Americans. I think they're good people at the end of the day. I think that he's been very divisive. I really don't like the approach he takes that creates cleavages in society, that is frankly outright racist. I think that's just awful. There's a long history of racism in America that he's tapping into that's completely unhelpful, and it's not right. And not that I'm a huge fan of everything that Democrats stand for, don't get me wrong, but I think he is much, much more dangerous to democracy and democratic principles and institutions. One of my great heroes was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan one time said, democracy and freedoms and liberties are not something we inherit in our genes. It's something that each generation has a responsibility to fight and defend. And I used to think at the time, well, that's kind of quaint. I agree with it, but it's kind of quaint because we really don't need to. But I have to say, over the term of Trump, you can see how important it is. There are really important democratic principles that he undermines every week. And we have to fight and defend those principles. And so my vote would be not for him, for sure.
I think, most would say, or at least most in Canada probably would say. I don't know. Actually, it's hard to say. Who knows? There's definitely people out there that seem to like him. So switching over to you left politics, you're over at Anthem Capital. When you leave politics, I would assume, someone with your reputation and skill set would be kind of hunted down by lots of big businesses. You had real estate experience prior to going into politics, so maybe that's why real estate. But what made you go over to Anthem, and what do you do there? What's the role?
Sure. So, well, first of all, yeah, I had actually a surprising number of really interesting offers. And I remember when I left government, I left without I had not lined up anything. To be honest, I hadn't thought that far ahead, and it would be wrong anyhow as a minister of finance to be, secretly talking to people and trying to, at least for me, from an integrity point of view, I wasn't interested in doing that. So when I retired from public life, I hadn't decided where I was going to work next. I had a number of really interesting offers. Most of them were unfortunately either outside of Canada or in Toronto. And it was really important for me with my wife. Her family was all here at the time, and so was mine. We had young kids. I really wanted to stay in BC. Anthem was not even on my radar of contemplation, but somebody had contacted me that worked there who I knew and said, Eric Carlson, the CEO of and the founder of Anthem, he might be someone that's worth talking to, because he does a lot more than real estate now. He's got all these investments and all these other businesses. He could use some help, at the senior level. And I said, sure, of course I'll talk to him, and, not flippant, but yeah, I don't know much about Anthem. I know they're a developer, but I really didn't know too much about them. So I met with Eric and I really liked him. Like we clicked, right? Because first of all, he likes politics, which is helpful. And I really liked him. And I particularly liked the fact that he's got a strong streak of integrity. He's a very honest person. He's a real hard worker, and he's got oodles of integrity. So that really aligned with my values. And so I went to work with him. And so I work in the capital side of the business. I work with some of our financial partners that invest in real estate with us. So a lot of our projects, we bring in, investors in each project, typically financial partners that work with us. And I also do, oversee some of our other investments that are non-real estate investments. So I sit on some boards and oversee some of the passive investments that we've made outside of the real estate business. So it's great. And the other thing is Eric's been really good about allowing me to continue to do a lot of the things I care about, being involved in the Street to Home Foundation, Connect Place, some of these other charities and hospital boards, et cetera, that I stay involved with. And that helps satisfy my desire to keep being involved in the public sphere.
That's great. So we're running out of time here. I've got maybe one more question for us or for you. What if you were to give advice to some young person who was thinking about getting into the politics world? What would you like? Let's say some kids coming out of Vancouver College, going to university. What kind of advice would you give to that person of how to get involved in politics, especially with the way that it works these days?
My advice would be to get an education, get involved on a volunteer basis. If you're interested in politics, I think the best thing you can do to get involved, political parties love young people that get involved, so that you'll always be welcome, and do a good job. Like every time you get involved, whether it's with a candidate or a campaign, always be the first to volunteer to do something and do it well, and you will get noticed quickly. That's one thing that's really important. Second thing I would say is if you want to run for politics, get a career first. I think it's really important to get real life experience. And when we got elected in 2001, I got elected with a group of colleagues, fantastic. They all had a lot of great background, good experience, and that really helped us be a good government. So get a career and get started in that career, and then consider going into politics. And I think you'll find it very fulfilling if you follow my principles and values that I think are really important to me too.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for doing this and taking the time tonight. The hour went by very quickly, but I appreciate you, agreeing to do it and taking the time, and for everybody on the line for hanging out and asking your questions. Just a quick note for next week, we have Prabjit and Ricky Ball. They run Lotus Terminal Group, which is one of the largest cross-dock freight logistics and trucking companies in Greater Vancouver. They're going to talk to us about, especially for me, of how that even works and what the whole logistics and trucking business is like. So you can grab a ticket for that and register. But again, yeah, Kevin, thank you very much. Really appreciate you you joining us.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. Appreciate all your efforts too. See you, everyone. Good seeing everyone there.